That's a good thing. I'm not going to have you repeat that in the mic, Representative Hill. So we do have a bill to work, so I am going to open discussion and action on Senate Bill 47, and I'm going to open the discussion with one of two amendments. And Jason, let's start with the one on page 2, with building access. Building access. Thank you. So I really took a look at the statute in a lot of different parts of the statute and the Constitution. And if you notice in this bill, the fact that the school board shall have control of the school building or district property is already law. And I think there is sometimes confusion between what some board members say, well, the superintendent won't let me, or maybe they don't know that their district has already adopted a policy. So my amendment keeps this there because they already have the right to do that under existing law, but it makes it subject to any school district policies regarding such access. Jason, if you'd like to explain.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, yes, the amendment that appears on page 3 of the bill would simply make that access to the school district property subject to any policies that have been adopted by the Board of Education regarding that access.
Any questions for the reviser? Okay, are you sure? All right, any questions for the bringer of the amendment? Would someone like to second the amendment? Oh, yes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So this not only means that it's subject to what the school has set up as far as safety measures, but also whatever the school board policy is for that district. Is that correct?
Jason?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Then, so I move favorable adoption of this amendment is seconded by Representative Steele. Is there further discussion? Seeing none, I'll call the question. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. And opposed, same sign. And the motion carries. I do have another amendment. And this one is about reasonable meeting limits. And we'll have Jason explain.
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee, the amendment that appears on page 2 is regarding the new language there starting in line 21 on conduct of the local Board of Education meetings. First, it modifies paragraph 5 so that it would be 2 or more members of the board may jointly add one discussion item to the agenda of any school board meeting. This is a change from the current law language of the bill, which allows one member of the board to add an agenda item for discussion onto the agenda of the board meeting. The change would require 2 or more members to act jointly to do so. And then the language following that in line 24 on allowing members to engage with members of the public who are addressing the board and to provide for a public comment period at every regularly scheduled meeting. Those provisions would be subject to reasonable procedural limits that may be set by the presiding officer at the board meeting.
Questions for Jason? Representative Chauncey.
I guess my question isn't necessarily for Jason. I was just curious about the amendment, but if we're waiting, I guess to bring her first.
Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, just on the reasonable procedural limits. So if a board said they had to be within the district or something, is that what you're trying to cover there, just as an example?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, as an example of reasonable procedural limits, the presiding officer may establish a time limit for when that public comment period can run for X number of minutes. Other possible policy examples would be notifying the board that the person desired to speak during the public comment period, things of that nature.
Okay, thank you, sir. Thank you, madam.
Representative Stockstill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was kind of had a question about that same area where it says to any reasonable procedural limits that may be set by the presiding officer. I would imagine the term reasonable is going to be interpreted in about 3,000 different ways. So I'm just wondering if it wouldn't be better, just in discussion, shall be subject to any procedural limits that may be set by the presiding officer. I think reasonable might be a flash word there.
Jason, is there a legal definition of reasonable or standard?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, typically in legal proceedings, reasonableness is attributable to what a reasonable person would consider to be conduct. And so, by example, a public comment period of 30 seconds might be considered unreasonable as a procedural limit compared to a public comment period of 15 minutes, so to speak.
Okay. I still think there may be some definition problems with that, but that come up, but I understand your position there. Thank you.
Representative Getz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yesterday in school board members roundtable, something came up a little bit around this, but basically out of district testimony coming in, does a board, or would this create, or do they already have authority to say only members of that school district, or if they have and this can be for Jason or you, Madam Chair, do they have authority to restrict who? And one thought that I had that might affect this was our open enrollment, that you can potentially go to other districts. And so how might a policy be enacted that the right people are at the table and having the conversation or having a disagreement around a topic, but not the wrong people that really don't have any stake in that school district? Would this policy help with that, or do they already have that authority to restrict who is coming to those meetings and giving testimony?
Jason.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, under current law, a local school board has the discretion and authority to establish its public comment period and any restrictions on that as it sees necessary to conduct the business of the school district. I believe under this language, reasonable procedural limits would be those that could be, reasonably related to the district itself. For example, restricting to maybe taxpayers who live in the district, maybe parents who have children enrolled in the district. Those are probably reasonable procedural limits, but again, it's going to be a question of how the policy is written and how it's implemented by each board.
Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Representative McNorton, and then Representative Chauncey, did you come back later? Okay, Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just to follow up on Rep. Getz, just our personal experience at our local school board, we have that policy that says you have to be a resident of the district or have a student that attends one of our facilities, so to be able to address the board. So I believe it is allowed. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Representative Schreiber.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Jason, on the two or more members of a board may jointly add one discussion item. this may be getting way too far in the weeds, but if you had Board Member A and Board Member B offer an item, and then could Board Member B and Board Member C add a second item?
Madam Chair, members committee, I don't see where that would be prohibited under this language. That would probably largely, though, fall under how the board establishes its policy in light of a change in the law for adding agenda items. They will probably have some sort of formal procedure for how members could go about adding decision items to the agenda should this be enacted.
So they could, but if this was statutory, would they have the ability to adjust that?
No, I'm just saying there'd be probably some more formal procedures around that ability to add a discussion item to the agenda should this be enacted into law.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Any other questions for Jason? Okay, seeing none, I'll move along. Did I miss one? Silas, Representative Miller, did I miss you? Oh, okay. You're the end two people on each side are the two hardest people for me to see, and anytime y'all need to wave me down, please do.
Thank you.
I brought this forward as somewhat of a compromise and to leave a lot of the discretion with the local boards and offer this. I move that we pass this favorably. I'm sorry, I forgot to go back to discussion, so before I move it, Representative Chauncey.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I guess I just had a quick question, and my concern is that if we go through the election and we get new members and nobody wants to agree with them on an issue that their constituents want represented at the school board meeting, then we disenfranchise that individual and don't give them an opportunity to bring up an issue to the school board by making them have two people or more agree on something that needs to be brought up with the board. And considering that we only typically meet once a month, and we volunteered and ran for a campaign for that position, maybe I think that it would be more appealing to me anyway, that if we allowed each individual member to have the opportunity to bring forward an issue. It's not like, I don't think it's going to add more than maybe 20 minutes to a half hour to a school board meeting in the majority of the time. So that'd be something I don't feel comfortable with, just making you have to, being a new member, that you have to find somebody that would agree with you before you can bring an issue forward.
Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would like to concur with the representative that just spoke. I think one thing that I have learned being here at the Capitol is that everyone was elected by voters, and those voters have a voice and desires that we're supposed to represent. And it's not me and another person, it's the constituents that you represent and representing their voice here at the table. And so I would think that a school board needs to be able to have that too, whether you are a minority or a majority party or whatever. So I disagree and will not be voting in favor of this amendment. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. I went with 2 because some boards require 4, and that's hard to hit with coma. Some boards require 3. And to me, 2 is like having a second when you want to make a motion. That's where my logic was. And I'm happy to split my amendment into 2 portions and handle them one at a time. I think that might make it easier for you guys. Representative Getz, did I see your hand?
Yes, you did. Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm kind of the opposite direction. Where I respect the single idea, and I know school boards are not this big, but if each member at each meeting could add a 20-minute, a 30-minute discussion to that meeting, it makes for a little bit of a hang-up. And getting 2, okay, now we have some agreements, they both want to discuss this, and to bring it over a little bit of comparison to us, there's a spot where, to get something on the agenda in a committee here is not an easy process, and there's a reason for that. And to get some consensus around it with other members, there's some behind the scenes work, and rational conversations, and here's why I think we need to talk about this. And maybe most still won't agree, but can we have this discussion? And so I appreciate the moving it towards at least two, needing some consensus around it. I think it does add a layer to meetings that makes it a little bit better. So I would support that part of this amendment. I think it makes the bill a little bit better.
Representative Schmoy.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My only concern with having two, I do understand the reasoning behind having two people agree to bring something, but does that put us at a potential of exposing them to like a coma chain issue if they have to have a discussion about it outside of the meeting, since they will be discussing something that they're going to be voting on?
Well, that's why I went with two and not three. The potential that you would have to talk to a majority of the members of the board is greatly decreased with two than three.
Okay, I'm just concerned, like if one contacted one other member and said, hey, this is what I've got going on, and that member contacted another member, then we've broken it. So I just don't want to put them into a situation where we're setting them up for failure. That's all.
Thank you, Representative Hill, and then Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I would request that we split the two amendments.
I stated that I will. I just think you guys are more comfortable answering the questions, and I think that I'm happy to do that. Representative Miller.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It was actually a perfect lead-in from one of the previous conferees. Speaking of set up for failure, or more specifically, what it feels like to struggle to feel like you have a voice as a member of the super minority party in a supermajority state. I would be glad to meet with any representative who struggles with what strategy is necessary to try to get your voice heard in a situation. But I would ultimately argue that I have trouble with this amendment in both directions, simply because I would also argue that we should hold ourselves to the same standard if we're going to impose these type of restrictions on a school board. I think that if everybody gets their day in court, then we should hold everybody to that same level of standard. So I'm still conflicted on the amendment, to sum it up. Thank you.
You're welcome. Any other discussion? Representative Ruiz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And along those lines, I'm kind of at a loss here. Maybe I'm losing track. And school boards are unique to each. We have, what, 100 and some school boards, or I don't know what it is. But
285.
so they all have their own established rules or parliamentary procedures?
Yes, they do.
So with this amendment and this, we're going to dictate to what we want them to adhere to. Is that what I'm understanding?
We have an entire set of statute that has a lot to do with their meetings. We have a requirement in statute that they meet at least once a month. We have a requirement that we have statute that sets how many members they have. So we have a statute that addresses that they will have a president, a vice president, what their quorum is.
And the structure, Madam Chair, but what concerns me is if we are imposing rules of operation for each unique school board.
Okay, point taken, thank you. Any other discussion? Then I am going to move the first balloon and the technical portions that go with it. Is there a second? Second from Representative Getz. Any further discussion? This is, I'm sorry, the two or more members of a board, that is that top balloon on the back of page 2. Representative Steele.
Are you making a motion to keep it or remove it?
To keep it. We are voting just to adopt, or a yes vote would adopt that upper balloon with 2 or more board members. A vote no, that would not be added. Representative Chauncey.
I would like to move that we strike.
We have one motion on the on the
But
floor.
I would move to amend that motion because I would like to, because we're voting on whether to adopt this or not without any changes.
No, let me explain where we are. The current language has the one that you prefer, so we don't need to move to adopt that. If you want to keep it at its current language, then you would vote no. If you would like to switch it to 2, then you would vote yes. And substitute motion was the motion you're looking for. Any other questions or discussion? All those in favor of the motion, please say aye. Opposed, no? No. Well, that lost. Thank you guys for the discussion. Even when something doesn't pass, I think the discussion is beneficial. I will now move down to the second balloon. All public comments, questions, and other engagements in discussion shall be subject to any reasonable procedural limits that may be set by the presiding officer. And have discussion on that balloon. Any discussion on that balloon? Representative Pichney.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a question, clarification to the reviser, if I could, please.
Yes, you may.
Is this not addressed in any of the existing statutes? Because I believe that school boards already take or have the liberty to set the rules for public comment, do they not? I know we do at counties. Are we duplicating something that's in statute already is the crux of my question.
Jason.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, because the language being added into this statute by the bill on engaging the public and when they're addressing the school board and requiring that there be time for public comment, there might be the question as to how much discretion a local board may have in terms of setting procedural limits on those comment periods and those exchanges. And so the language there and the balloon is to be more explicit in terms of the board's discretion in setting procedural limits.
Did that answer your question? Representative Chauncey?
Just for clarification on what we just voted on, did the balloon was the first balloon, do we take out strike line 21, strike lines 22, 23, 24, and strike lines 26?
Jason?
Yes, Madam Chair, members of the committee. So under the amendment that's currently being offered, the bill would keep paragraph 5 as it currently exists in the bill. So it would state any member of a board may add one discussion item under a discussion item to the agenda of any school board meeting. Then paragraph 6 would be any member of a board may ask questions or otherwise engage with a member of the public addressing the board, and each regularly scheduled meeting shall include time for public comment. And the amendment would be then to also add, and all public comments, questions, and other engagements are subject to reasonable procedural limits.
Did that answer your question? Thank you. Representative Schmoy.
Thank you again, Madam Chair. Since that says may, that means that the local school board can still decide whether or not they engage the public in discussion. Is that correct?
Jason?
My understanding is the way this is worded as being new language in that the opportunity to engage must be afforded by the Board of Education. But with this amendment, they can then set reasonable procedural limits for that engagement.
Okay, so
And it's conditioned on the public, when the public addresses the board.
Okay, all right, thank you.
You're welcome, Representative Stogsdill.
I'm still bothered by the reasonable. I think that just leaves us up into so many interpretations. And is it okay to make an amendment to this at this point, or is that passed?
You can make a substitute. Actually, I haven't moved it yet, so.
Okay. I can make a.
Yeah, or if you want to make a suggestion, I'm open to.
Okay. I would prefer to delete the word reasonable and have it just state the subject to any procedural limits that may be set by the presiding officer. I think, as I say, reasonable, I think that's just open to too many interpretations.
I will accept your suggestion and modify my amendment. We don't need to because I'm the maker of the amendment. Okay, Representative Getz.
I was just going to say, I really think it still says the same thing. I know it's removing one word, but procedural limits could also be interpreted pretty broadly too. And reasonable procedural limits, I'm fine with it. I just kind of wanted to say it doesn't necessarily really change anything, in my opinion. Thank you, Madam Chair.
You're welcome. Any other discussion? Then I move the adoption of the balloon that says all public comments, questions, and other engagements in discussion shall be subject to any procedural limits that may be set by the presiding officer. Is there a second by Representative Wolf? Any further discussion? Hearing none, the chair calls the question. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed, same sign? No. Okay. The ayes appear to have it. We will move on to any other further discussion or amendments on the underlying bill as amended. Is there any other discussion? Representative Pishney.
Madam Chair, even though I voted with regard to these amendments, I will be voting against this bill. I think it intrudes on local control. I think there are things already in place that boards have the ability to do what it is they want to do. Next, I believe that it may be addressing some issues that a small number of school boards in the state have voiced concern about, and it's somewhat like other issues that have adversely affected local control, in that we're addressing something that's an opinion or a concern of the minority of the groups out there. And then I'm very concerned about that paragraph 4 about listing addresses, some of the addresses, email addresses and all that stuff. And again, I think that should be left up to the local boards on what their policies might be. So even though I was voting with regard to amendments, which I think maybe made this bill better, I still, in good conscience, have to vote against it.
Thank you. Is there further discussion? Representative Featherston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I concur with the member from Finney County. I think there are personal safety issues at stake here for board members that local communities are better in deciding. It was brought up in committee that not all school districts have the same technology capacity, and this could be outside of the limits. We've already seen that an unintended consequence with the Greeley County School Bond when we required something to be posted online and they didn't have a website. And I don't have my glasses on. And it's legislative overreach. I think our school boards can handle this on their own. They were elected to do this job and they're fully capable.
Any further discussion? Representative Chauncey?
Yeah, I think just what my two previous representatives stated, I would somewhat disagree with that, because we make a choice. We're publicly elected people, school boards in the legislature. We run for this. We have a choice to run or not to run, and we're representing a group of people. We're required here at the legislature to put our name and address on our, yeah, we are. Well, our names are all, I mean, I can drive to, I don't know that we're required, but I think that, I mean, I know my name's there. I'm here all week. My wife's at home by herself working from home. Do I worry about her? Sure, but I'm a public figure. I chose to do this. I talked with my wife, and I think that's something that goes with running for a public office, is you're going to be in the public eye, and people should have access to you. I'm not advocating for people to come to your house and knock on your door, but I still think that information should be available so we could get a hold of these people. So I'll be voting for it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Representative Pishney, then Hill, and then Featherston.
Madam Chair, thank you for your indulgence. I missed one thing that I failed to mention. I do appreciate and respect the fact that in law right now, there are things about school boards, meetings once a month, things that you recited a little bit ago. And I think structure for those organizations like that is appropriate. But with this bill, I think we're starting to micromanage and overstep. Thank you.
You're welcome, Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. The first three words of the U.S. Constitution, we the people. I think this bill does a fair job of bringing us back to school boards that have tried to isolate themselves from we the people to being open. I think it's a reasonable amount, and I think it should not only be passed, and I will vote for it, but I think it should be applauded. Thank you.
Welcome, Representative Featherston, and then Schmoy. And we do have guests, and I want to move us along, speaking of reasonable time limits.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I was remiss in not applauding the amendments, which do make the bill somewhat better. I would just like to clarify, you will not find my personal address on any public-facing thing, and that is at the request of many people in my lives. And I would like to point out my state senator has had somebody show up on her front doorstep. So everybody needs to decide what their tolerance for personal safety is, and it shouldn't impede your ability to run, especially when you are asked by the people of your district to run. I really, in these times, think we need to really think about what we're inviting to be on people's front doorsteps.
Representative Schmoy.
Thank you again. Jason, this one's for you. Is it their address, their home address, or is it just email address?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, it is the current members, and an email address for each such member shall be on the website of the school district.
Okay, thank you very much. So we're not talking about their home address. We're talking about an email address, and they all, I believe, probably have one through their school district anyway, so that's already public. We're just making sure that the public knows where to find that. On top of that, given personal experience with interaction with school boards in my area, I see this as a really good stepping stone towards confidence in that district between the public who's voted for them and the people who are representing them. It really looks like transparency to me, so I appreciate this. Thank you.
Representative Hubert, then Stogstill, and then I'm going to call the question.
My point was already made and answered.
Thank you, Representative Stogstill.
Yeah, thank you, Madam Chair. I have some problems with this too. And when talking about email addresses, the way this is stated here, they could post both the school email address where you can reach a school board member or their personal email address, which I think is absolutely wrong. So this is up for interpretation the way it's written right here. It should say, if it says anything, it should say, and school or school board email address, not their personal email address if they don't want it. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Jason, is there something that requires it be a personal email address, or is it an option with the word or?
Madam Chair, members of the committee, it just says an email address for such board member. There is no specification as whether it must be a personal email address or a school district issued email address.
Thank you. The chair recognizes Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm a member of a school board. This bill would not change one thing on the way we operate. The thing we have to think about are there are a lot of school boards in our state who are not letting their members of their school board do this, or their citizens have the right to come and talk to their school boards like I have that privilege. The email that I have as a school board email is just published on their website. It doesn't have to be a link. It doesn't have to do anything with cybersecurity. It's just a website that has my email out there so my constituents know how to get a hold of me other than seeing me at the grocery store. So, Madam, I think this is good to make sure that all of our school boards know their rights and have the ability to help their constituents and the citizens in their district. So I move that we adopt the bill favorably,
As amended?
as amended.
Thank you. Any further discussion? Seeing none, the chair calls the question. Those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed, same sign. No. The ayes appear to have it. The ayes do have it. Does anybody request to be recorded? Representative Stogstill, Wynn, Ruiz, Featherston, and Miller vote no. Thank you all for a very robust discussion. I think a lot of important views and discussion was held. We are going to move forward now to what I called in the agenda accreditation, but we really started out as KISA 2.0 because it's been in the development process. But before I do that, since the state board is going through a time period to adopt some things, I did ask research to take a look at what some of our surrounding states or other states do on accreditation, and they're going to share that with you very quickly.
Thank you, Madam Chair, members of the committee. My name is Elena Rudder with Legislative Research, and my colleague Nicole is handing out a table that we made, which includes CSG Midwest states and the surrounding states. In this table, there is information about who the accrediting agency is in each state, whether they accredit by school level or district level, what the accreditation categories are, and whether or not they include test scores in their criteria. And then just some general information about other states. As of January 2023, there were about 26 states with some form of accreditation system. And around 20 of those 26 states require accreditation for all public K-12 schools or districts. And also some of those 20 states include accreditation in their accountability system. And every state has an accountability system. Not every state has an accreditation system. So some options for who the accrediting agency might be is like the State Department of Education or State Board of Education, like in Kansas, and then our surrounding states, Colorado, Missouri, Nebraska, and Oklahoma. And then other states may have an outside or regional accrediting agency. For example, in your table on the second page, North Dakota is accredited by Cognia, and their Department of Public Instruction is also accredited. And then there are also states that have optional accreditation, such as Michigan. And I would be happy to answer any questions you have.
Thank you very much. The diversity of what you found is very fascinating to me. Representative Getz.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for this presentation of multiple states. I was looking for the wordage on probation, probationary accreditation, candidate for accreditation. Are any of these terms, do you know are most of them linked to less funding? Is there, I mean, it's kind of one of those things where you can have this label, but it mean nothing? Or are there certain stipulations that you found that went with these? Maybe a little bit of behind each of those terminologies, what happens?
Madam Chair, Representative Getz. It varies by state. I was not able to look fully at all of these states. These are the accreditation categories that are generally defined in rules and regulations. One of the states that I was able to look at the most is Colorado, and their like accredited with turnaround plan is like steps they have to take. It does, none of the categories affects funding in Colorado, though. If a state, or if a district loses its accreditation, then the State Board of Education would take other actions, such as reorganization or conversion to a charter school or something else, when the time comes.
Quick follow-up from Representative Getz and then Representative McNorton.
Thank you. And is the criteria mostly around outcomes or school safety? What, like to some of the things that we saw on ours, on that presentation, is it similar on these different categories? Thank you, Madam Chair.
Madam Chair, Representative Getz, it's a mix of a lot of things depending on which state you're looking at and which accrediting agency you're looking at. I think Iowa had some information about like safety included in their general accreditation rules and regs. And then Colorado is, they have performance indicators, which are weighted the most in their accreditation system. And those include like academic growth, academic achievement, and then workforce and post-secondary success. And I can get you more information on that if you would like.
Thank you, Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So just real quick, Cognia, I'm assuming that's an outside accrediting agency or something? Okay, thank you.
Madam Chair, for the record, yes, it is an outside agency. It is formally known as Advance Ed.
Yes, and I don't mean to be rough on people because the last few days you've heard me talk about the microphone. We do have some people that the only way they can access us is through our audio feed. So they miss some of those things, and that's why I try to be very careful about the microphone, not just to be a nudge. Thank you for all of your work on this. I found this very fascinating. I have one quick question for you. Was there any awareness that you found of a state like Colorado where they give any kind of financial reward or benefit to having reached their accredited with distinction?
Madam Chair, I don't recall seeing any kind of financial incentive, but I will double check and get back to you.
I appreciate that. I know this took a lot for you guys to put together, and you guys are incredibly busy, so I appreciate all the work that you guys did. And last call for questions for Elena. And I'm sure that she would be very happy to follow up with you if you'd like to get some further information about this or have her take a look at it, any other states. We are now going to play musical chairs. Elena, Nicole, and Michelle are going to move, and we're going to bring our roundtable guests forward. And as we do so, we're going to pay attention to when we run out of chairs and need to grab the very uncomfortable wooden chairs. So if you are a roundtable guest, please proceed to the seated area. Oh, this is true. Thank you, Representative Getz. If we run out of chairs, we can roll some of the other ones in. And were you guys saying down there? Okay. So the hardest part of this is you all get to share the same microphone, but what I'm going to suggest is Dr. Watson take the one off the podium, and that could be shared. That will kind of give us one less person to have to spread apart. And first of all, I want to start by thanking all of our guests for being here. I think accreditation is one of those incredibly important things. And we're going to begin by introducing ourselves to you. And I'm going to start on the end with Representative Miller. Would you like to introduce yourself and just say what school district or districts you represent?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So my name is Silas Miller. I represent District 86, which is kind of south central, southeast Wichita. East High is in that district, and the old southeast campus is in that district as well. I also went to USD 259, I guess, 4th grade through 12th grade. So.
Thank you, Representative Featherston. We're going to move through these very quickly into discussion.
I'm Linda Featherston. I represent Overland Park, which is Shawnee Mission, parts of Shawnee Mission, Olathe, and Blue Valley, who I'm proud to say are all in the top 5 for Kansas schools.
Thank you. Representative Schreiber.
Mark Schreiber, District 60, represent Districts 251 and 253.
And we are going to skip over the best dressed committee assistant in the entire building with Michelle, and we'll go to Representative Hubert.
Representative Getz from Dodge City. He's got a lot better hair than me.
You've got the wrong sign in front of you. That's not nice to do to a dyslexic lady.
Surely you know me. We office together. Dodge City is my district, USD 443. My daughter's a teacher. My son's in special education. What was the other thing I was going to say? Oh, I think we're the 6th or 7th largest high school in the state. Very large district, even though we're in a rural area. So glad you're here.
Representative Stogstill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. It's Representative Jerry Stogstill. I represent the 21st District in Johnson County. Mostly Prairie Village and a little bit of Overland Park, and my district is totally within the boundaries of the Shawnee Mission School District.
Very good. I am Susan Estes, and I represent the 87th District, which includes parts of Wichita and parts of Andover.
I'm Representative Kyle McNorton. I represent almost all of the Seaman School District, Silver Lake, and Rossville in northern Shawnee County.
I am Representative Megan Steele. My district includes the Wamego School District, part of the Manhattan School District, Wabunsie in Alma, and Mission Valley.
I'm Representative Sherry Brantley from Great Bend. I represent Central Plains, Ellenwood, Hoisington, Otis Bison, and Great Bend schools.
My name is Scott Hill. I'm from Abilene, Kansas. I primarily represent Dickinson County, about half of Marion County, a little bit of McPherson County. I have more districts than you have time to listen to right now, and every one of them is the best according to the opinion poll right here.
Representative Sean Chauncey, Junction City, Geary County, Fort Riley, 475 District.
Lon Pishney, I represent the 122nd District that includes schools in Lakin, Deerfield, Garden City, Holcomb, the Hodgman County Schools, Jetmore and Hanston, and Roselle and Burdett, and even some of the Larned High School area.
Sorry, forgive me. Don Wolf, I represent the 107th District, which includes Minneapolis, Bennington-Tuscott, a part of Salina, Beloit, and Concordia.
Thank you guys for being here. Representative Rebecca Schmoy, I have West Franklin, which is District 287, Central Heights, which is 288, and then Ottawa School District, which is 290.
Thank you all. And I'm going to allow our guests to introduce themselves, and I'm going to begin with a frequent guest, Dr. Randy Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Randy Watson, Commissioner of Education.
Stu Meckel, I'm Superintendent of Eudora Schools.
I'm Melanie Thank you. I'm Melanie Haas. I represent District 2 on the State Board of Education, and that includes primarily Turner, KCK, SMSD, Shawnee Mission Schools, and a little bit of Olathe and Blue Valley.
Alia Schumann, Director of Teaching and Learning with Kansas National Education Association.
Shannon Kimball, I am here in my capacity as past president of the USD 497 Board of Education, and though you know lots about me from other spheres, I'm a parent. I have 2 children who are in Lawrence Public Schools and one who is a graduate of a couple years ago.
Very good. So I appreciate all of you guys taking the time to come here. Most of the time, we run a pretty tight ship, but the roundtables give us a chance to just kind of loosen up a little bit, have some back and forth conversation. And to kick us off, I would say that we've been very impressed with what KISA 2.0 looks like now. I personally have an appreciation that it does look at every building in an annual basis. But when we've gotten a chance to kind of talk about the second half of KISA 2.0 is kind of what does it look like, and I just thought we don't often have the opportunity to all get together and say what we're looking for that. So I thought I would start with Idalia and just kind of say, what do you like about KISA 2.0? And then in terms of when it comes to setting the criterias and the second half of KISA policies and regulations, what are you hoping to see?
Thank you so much, Chair Estes. Idalia Schumann. What I really like about the KISA is that it is looking at an annual review, that they do have regional directors that are working with a set group of districts. So they build that relationship and have frequent communication with them. And they do come together to do in-school professional development with the staff, which also provides that boots on the ground opportunity to really look and hear from the staff as well.
Very good. And what's important to you when we finish out, or when, not when we, but when the final details for KISA 2.0 are out there in terms of what's success and all the other fun details?
Districts are being asked to create an action plan. And I really like that. So that action plan is something that they come back to, that they will be visiting with their staff and with their regional lead. So if they're meeting those, that plan, then they can add or take away from to continually seek more improvement or to add other areas that they recognize need to be added to that action plan. And that's what I like, that it's a living document. It's not one and done. It's continual growth.
Thank you, Shannon.
So speaking to KISA 2.0 from a board member perspective, my district has already begun the process as of last summer, as this was coming out from the State Department, of looking at the fundamentals and the measures that the state board will be looking at as part of that process and weaving that into our needs assessment process that we do as a district and as a Board of Education, as well as our goal setting and other internal processes that our district has already had. So what I really appreciated about, I'm sorry, pardon me. What I really appreciated about the structure is that I think it, the four fundamentals really align almost perfectly with the highest priorities that we've identified in our goal setting in our district around improving literacy, making sure that the standards are aligned in every classroom in our district with the instruction that is happening, focusing on assessment and making sure that we are using assessment in a way that helps us move kids forward, and then just that focus on quality instruction as the fourth fundamental. That, I mean, that's really what we want to be doing anyway. So it makes a lot of sense. From a process perspective, I really like as a board member that this is something that is going to become an annual process rather than something that you do a little bit of every year over 5 years. Your board term as a board member is 4 years. And so you might not even see a whole process through if you're following that 5-year process. So I think this is this allows more timely adjustment from the perspective of governance as a board member.
Melanie.
One of the many things I like about KISA 2.0 is that it is collaborative and it's ongoing, which makes it more meaningful, I think, for districts. We're not just looking at numbers over every 5 years, or even every 1 year, it's not just about the numbers. It's about having the opportunity to sit down with other districts that are similar to yours. So that like district concept, I think, is something that really adds value to the process and creates an environment where districts are challenged to always be getting better. And so we like to talk at the state board about how accreditation is not a gotcha system. We really want to see districts growing and finding ways, no matter how good you are, there's always room for improvement, right? So how can those districts find an opportunity and improvement? And I think that sitting down with essentially their peers and being able to go through that process is one of the greatest aspects of it. I could go on, there's a long list. Did I answer both of your questions?
I think you did. We'll move on to Stu. Thank you so much.
I like too that it is simpler than the previous system.
So we were able to, as a district, sit on the pilot for the KISA 2, and so we were able to kind of play an input into what we wanted to see Eudora schools were in our team. What I love, and I know our board appreciates, is the freedom that gives them, as well as the tightened focus on academic achievement. And you can see that in their foundational structures. And so when you talk about it, it puts the onus on, we want to get better, we're here to focus on student achievement, and we're going to look at this at a minimum of a yearly basis. What our district was able to do is take the KISA 4 fundamentals and then wrap those into our strategic plan that we adopted in September, and I'll hand this out or eventually, and then we were able to also take care of our building that into our 6-month and our yearly goals. And so for us, it's really become a guidepost for our board. And so it brings the focus of our board meetings on what we're doing, and that the fact that KISA doesn't exist over here. It adds coherence to a continuous improvement that we've focused on for many years. And for us, our board has said, we have tons of data, we need to know what to focus on. And so we're able to create a dashboard that put in front of our board on a quarterly basis that holds us accountable to our community, to our staff, and to our students and family. And so I know they appreciate that because they feel like they're getting data that's measurable every quarter, and that's what we're focusing on as well as a district.
Thank you, Dr. Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I apologize. I feel really bad. I usually stand up there and my back is to you. I feel
it is a very awkward
but I just
setup.
wanted to acknowledge that.
It's what we have.
I feel bad about that. Obviously, since we were a part of putting it together with the state board, I would say this, that I'm really proud of. This is many years in the development after we went from the first round of KISA, which followed No Child Left Behind. We continue to learn about how policy affects behavior. And that's what we're trying to impact. How does policy affect in the behavior that we want to see? So you see that this is a streamlined version over the previous version. We've got rid of a lot of things and said, let's focus on what is really important to improve the outcomes of success for young people. That feedback loop continues, it's continuing today. We have school improvement days going on with some districts right now. And we're getting feedback on that as we go into the next year. So this year is about establishing the plan, as you've heard, and the process. Next year, we'll be holding people accountable to executing that plan. And then by the third year, we're looking at, did that plan start to move the outcomes? And if it did not, why did it? Did it not? Was it an execution problem, or did you not do what you said? And we'll have an assistance team that may go into districts to help assist at that time. So we'll continue to learn, Madam Chair, and your feedback has been invaluable too as we continue in this process.
Thank you. I'll ask a follow-up question to what you just said, because you said you're evaluating, then coming up with an assistance plan. When you look at that assistance plan, what do you think is a reasonable amount of time to allow for that to work before you take other measures?
So there's two things that we'll be looking at when we look at the outcomes. We'll be looking at what we're calling the standards of measure. So I'll use graduation just as one example, where the standard is 95%. Are you at 95%? If the answer to that is no, then the next question is, are you showing growth toward the 95%? And I believe, Madam Chair, to your question is, what's the appropriate time to see if a plan impacts the growth toward that target. What we would tend to look at is an every year look at a multiple year process. So we're looking at it every year, but looking at that every year look would be a 3 to 5 year look back. So you're always dropping off a year and you're looking at a multiple year view every year. The reason for that is the average or the median sized school district in our state is just over 500 students. And if you look at any given year in a graduating class, you can have widely variances. But if you look at that over a multiple year, you get an indication, is that trend line moving up? Is it stagnant or is it moving down? So you look at it every year, but you're looking at it over a multiple year period.
Which I appreciate that. It's almost like a credit score model because, so I appreciate the roll on and roll off. But how many years do you let it go before we say, okay, the plans that we're doing aren't working? And can you get into that a little bit?
Sure. And just understand that the state board hasn't taken specific action on that part yet, because that's still in development with our researchers and our team to bring to the state board. So I don't want to get out too far in front of them. I will just say that if it hasn't moved in that period over to the second year of looking at that, assistance team right now is our plan. Assistant team then would be deployed to take a look at what is happening in that school district. And then some decisions will be made going forward. Again, that has not been approved by the state board. I want to be clear of that. But that's our thought right now, at least internally.
Very good. Would somebody else like to ask a question of our roundtable? You guys are, thank you. I knew you guys are not this quiet. Representative Steele.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for being here. I think one of the things that concerns me the most is that we do not have good reading scores, math scores. So how are you incorporating KESA 2.0 to really focus on those fundamental skills that our children need to be successful in their future? Thank you.
Were you directing that at anyone? Okay.
So I can address that. At least that's been our focus on our strategic plan as one of our pillars of instructional excellence will be that we'll focus our professional development on that instructional coherence and alignment of classroom practices so that we can focus on our set district agreements and state standards so that we're aligning and so that we're teaching best practices in our classrooms and so that our teachers are getting the best possible training on that, as well as obviously the state's guidance with letters training, for the focus being that we've set a goal by the end of our strategic plan to have all students reading at grade level in third grade. We know that's an ambitious goal, but we know without setting that ambitious goal, it's just, well, we hope that some of them will improve. And so our focus has truly been on that as a laser-like focus as a district, instead of, oh, this school's focusing on this and this school's focusing on this, is bringing that as a true vision from our Board of Education built on our community input.
Just to ask, before I go to Melanie, a quick follow-up to Representative Steele's question. What portion of your teachers at the elementary level have completed letters?
We're well over 50% and heading to, we believe, we have, I think, a second to last group coming on, so we believe we'll be over 100% before the deadline. So,
And then Melanie, and then Representative McNorton.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Representative, for the question. You just heard what's happening in Eudora, and I'm going to use some of your words and go right back to, sorry, this is my first draft that I have carried around forever because I was so excited from the beginning, and I drew this big number 4 up here for the 4 fundamentals, but the very first one is structured literacy. And so you asked about those fundamentals and where are we? Yep, trying to do
Well,
that.
that's why I'm asking, because I want to know, what are you specifically doing for that?
Absolutely. So I talked a little bit earlier about how districts are getting together with like districts. And I think that there's a real benefit in that. When I think about, my children are in a school district that has around 25,000 students. And so in contrast to that average of 500 students in a district, I think it's important that districts get to sit down with others that, sorry, I'm not sure if the mic is cutting in and out, with others that are facing similar challenges. And so by being able to have those collaborative opportunities, they are also helping each other in that process. And I might defer a little bit to Ms. Kimball, because you talked as well about the 4 fundamentals, and I'm sure you've got some things to say about literacy in Lawrence.
I would maybe answer it by saying we were already focused on trying to do that work even before KISA 2.0 really is becoming more of a focus. But for example, in my district, we've encouraged participation in letters training, and even as far back as last spring, we were already over 78% of our elementary staff had either completed the cohort or were in the cohort to complete it. Our expectation is that 100% of those teachers will. Our 100% at that point last spring, 100% of our administrators at that level had already completed it as well. So our staff is committed to making those improvements, and I think that's really what's important about that is that the accreditation model is aligning with the needs that we were already identifying and trying to work on, and that is helping us move that work forward.
Representative Watson, Commissioner Watson.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So the state board, at the time of the COVID relief funds, commonly called ESSER funds, allocated up to, in 2 separate decisions, up to $25 million to train every existing teacher in the science of reading.
I
wasn't as riveting as the officer, obviously.
I'm so sorry. So something underneath the table may have gotten touched by, and don't, just go ahead and we're going to ignore. They now know we are all safe.
Okay. I'm sorry to have sounded the alarm that we were unsafe, Madam Chair. So the state board set aside money and said, we have to do 2 things. We have to ensure that everyone that comes out of a Kansas university and college is appropriately trained to teach structured literacy. And that was the first thing that they did. Second thing is we have to retrain then everyone that may have been trained in a different model. They appropriate to spend up to $25 million to have everyone have that opportunity that you mentioned. It's called letters training. And so that was the action that was taken immediately by state board. What's less common, they also took some action with money to establish what we call the Kansas Math Project, which lives on too, where you can get math training along the same ways. So those were the 2 things that were, they had access to funds, and they put the majority of funds to work in those 2 areas.
Thank you. Representative McNorton, Brantley, Hill, and Featherston.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Stu, right? Is that? I appreciate your goals you talked about, but how about an action plan on how you're going to achieve those goals, how you're going to make something happen? What are the teachers? Are the teachers on board? You know, just to give us a goal that we've heard for years and years and years. You know, I guess that's what we're looking for or wanting, you know, is how are we going to make an impact instead of here's our goal to have 75%, 90%, you know, if you would.
Absolutely, and we speak about that a lot because a goal without a plan is truly just a dream. And so what you see there is the KISA's model of a 6-month and a yearly goal, and it looks like a very heavy lift, and that's the first thing we told our teachers as we continue to develop this with our district leadership team and our building leadership team, but those were things that we were already had in place. You can see that when it talks about instructional excellence, evaluate high school curriculum resources and alignment, explicit training on high-quality instructional practices identified through the walkthrough tools, and then each one of these has a target that we will work towards. And if you look at the red piece at the end, you can see where it aligns to the KISA standards that are built in there down at the bottom, or their 4 fundamentals. So not only do we have a goal, we also have a plan to get there. Our job then, as we do that, is to provide that feedback back to our board for their better understanding, their guidance, and then we have to evaluate, is this plan working? And instead of taking a 5-year model, we are able to do that very quickly through actionable steps and getting feedback from all levels of our district, from the classroom all the way to the boardroom.
And just to let you know, we didn't set this up because I didn't know he had all this here ready for me.
Absolutely not.
But thank you, this is excellent.
I actually have more to hand out, but I don't want to make the other members of the roundtable hand those out, so.
Stu, I'm going to follow up on Representative McNorton's question. When I look at the structures, I see things here that make sense to me. Kind of one of the things that I'm looking for, what are the assessment, specific assessment measures, the standardized test, the formatives, are they reflected somewhere in this document?
They are, but that would be a better indication, obviously. If you check, I don't have a back of this. If you look at our strategic plan, we have what we call our dashboard in non-dashboard form here. I'm going to hand these out. But what that is that talks directly to our standards of measure for all of these goals. When the board visited about setting up a strategic plan, we wanted goals that were measurable so that it didn't feel like we were moving the needle or the goalposts. And so what we have always called a state assessment are our scoreboards, because that happens at the end of the year. We're not making a radical change mid-year with our state assessments, but it is something we hold ourselves accountable to. And so if you look, I think I gave, can I have that copy back? Thank you. If you check the back page, or back couple pages, you will see another matrix, if you will, underneath our pillars. It looks similar to this, but that lists it's got a lot of pieces on it, but it does list the matrix at which we'll measure ourselves. One of them is graduation rate that the state takes for us. The other is our post-secondary rate. But you can see with our structured literacy, percentage of eligible staff trained for science of reading, vocabulary routine implement, which is something we have district-wide. But then you can also go to our academically prepared ACT scores, work keys, state assessment. Those are all things that not only our board is going to have access to presented quarterly, or as we get that information, that's our accountability to our community as well, and especially to our families. So they can track this. Our board spent a lot of time looking at state assessment data, and what we noticed is it hadn't changed a lot. It hadn't shifted. And we took a piece of our data all the way back 7 years, so pre-COVID, and what we found is that our test scores had been stagnating. And so that was a real indication to our board that we needed to have a renewed focus, not on the state assessments themselves, but how we move the needle for student achievement.
And I think there's some validity in that conversation in terms of improvement, and I am glad to see things like third grade proficiency results, ACT results, and state assessments. And I think what I'm looking for is more of, let's set a standard in front of us. We want to have our average ACT result at a certain point, that we want to have a certain amount of students that we don't want our level 1 to be higher than a certain percentage of all of our students and so on. So to me, that's the second half that's coming in this conversation of very clear articulated standards that we are going to agree to hold ourselves to, and that we know whether or not we're meeting, kind of a definition of success. So I like to see the way that you're going, and I really look forward to much more detail. Representative Brantley.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you all for being here today. I see a lot of familiar things on this chart. Can you tell me, so one of my concerns is how do we get more teachers into the field? And as I talk to a lot of them throughout the state, the burnout's high. And I was able to step back in the classroom for a while, and I can understand that feeling. What we seem to be, well, the general theme that I'm getting from teachers is that struggle with behaviors in their classroom. And this plan is great for how do I teach, time to teach, but what can we do to help the classroom with behaviors, to give our teachers the most time to teach those academics and not spend their time on behaviors?
Directed at a particular person. Anybody like to have that one? Idalia, we are going to be talking about teacher retention next week, but in the short term, do you have anything that you'd like to say about burnout from the teacher union perspective?
Thank you, Representative Estes. I hear this all the time, obviously, and with the new initiatives, they're saying it's one more thing, one more thing. I'm being asked to do additional learning on my own time. Already, my preparation time exceeds my work time. Not having sufficient prep time, not having collaboration time with their colleagues. These are all things our educators are asking for. And I know that districts are trying to do their best to meet those needs. And I just ask that we consider compensation for educators when they're giving up so much of their time. They are professionals who want to meet the needs of their students, so let's give them the respect that they're due. And the best way we can do that is by ensuring that they have time for collaborative preparation with their colleagues, that they're compensated for their time to go above and beyond the school day.
Representative Brantley, a very quick follow-up.
Make it quick. So, and I totally understand that time and compensation, but I want to know specifically as district, state, how do we help them with behaviors in the classroom with, say, consequences and such that we can follow through with so they feel like they have the support?
I can speak to that from our perspective because I mean, I think it's safe to say that we are seeing an escalation of some of behaviors in some of our classrooms, which obviously we know does take away from the rest of the class. But we also know that that student's communicating something to us as well. So we spend a lot of time in figuring out how we can gauge that family and how we can work as a team unit to better meet the needs of that students. Along with our mental health behavioral specialists, we work with Bert Nash for our students that truly need the next step. But a lot of it is truly building those relationships. And part of that, at least we believe, is that sense of belonging in a welcoming environment for each and every one of our students so that they feel like they're comfortable in that setting and they can work well with their peers and with their staff members.
And if I may, I'd like to add to that a little bit too. It's definitely about the culture of the school. Our educators need to feel supported when they're working with those challenging students. So having a good plan in place of how you're going to address students' behavior really helps support the educator when they're having to make those decisions, those split-second decisions every day, multiple times. So they need to have that support by their administration and their schools. And if they all are on board on that same page, we have a way of wrapping around that child to help meet their needs.
Representative Brantley, I just may add, I traveled some last week out in schools, and I was in Great Bend, and they've just implemented a program called RISE, and where they've said we can't keep Band-Aiding and putting kids, teachers are burning out, families are burning out, and they remove kids, put them in an alternate setting, give them therapeutic help, and then slowly transition them back to the classroom. They wrap around the teacher comes and visits so that they know, hey, you're coming. And in the short run, because it's, as you know, it just started this year, they've been very successful in doing that.
Thank you. Melanie, you had a comment?
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just wanted to point out that the State Board of Education we convened a Blue Ribbon Task Force last year to talk about screen time and have seen that tied directly to student behaviors. And so as districts have started to implement cell phone policies and device policies in their schools, the feedback that I'm hearing is positive and that really is affecting those behaviors.
So real quick, you recommended a cell phone policy. What was the thought behind not making that a policy? What was the thought behind not implementing a policy, this is what we're going to do as a state board?
Yes. So the thinking behind that is that the state board really, we prefer to defer to local control wherever it makes sense. We will issue guidance, and I think that the last time, a big piece of guidance from the state board, for instance, was as we were headed into COVID, and this was actually before I was on the board, but heading into COVID, the state board recommended a large document of guidance for districts around the state so that they could all be on the same page. With the Blue Ribbon Task Force, the group that convened, we had 36 people that were on that task force. Parents, teachers, administrators, students participated. We had state board members on it. Representative Hill was on it. There may be others in the room. So we had a wide variety of people that came together to do that work over a short period of time. The task force then wrote essentially a report. So the board did not recommend, nor did the board decide to endorse the report. They simply accepted the report, said thank you for your work, but that report was made available to districts so that they could use it the same way that they would use guidance.
Thank you. We're going to move on, and do want to try to keep us focused on KISA. Representative Hill.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I kind of need to preface this question because I truly appreciate the work that each of you does for school improvement and has been done for many, many years in Kansas. I think it's been for a long time, school improvement's been a focus and a concern for a lot of people. I can't ignore, though, and I really kind of hate to ask this question, but I can't ignore the sheet that got passed out to us about surrounding states and accreditation models. And included in that list that I looked at, there are 3 states that have no state accreditation, okay? And I just, my first thought on that was, well, how are those states doing? And when I pulled up their NAEP composite score, which that's one measure, we know one measure, all 3 of those states are higher in their NAEP composite score than Kansas is. And, a little bit of this, and this is just kind of a thrown out discussion question, but we're talking about how many hours go into our accreditation, how many hours go into school improvement, how many reports are generated. We kind of talked about that earlier in the year. How many reports are generated, and all of these are great things and well-meaning things, but at the end of the day, are we any better off than the states that are doing the approach of we believe in our local districts? And so I guess my question is, I'm kind of wandering around and just talking here, kind of got a headache and kind of been a long day, but why do we believe as legislators, I'm going to start with that, as legislators and as state board members and as people that work in the Department of Education, what is it that makes us believe that we care more about the performance of a local school than the local school does? Anybody want to take a stab at that one?
Commissioner Watson.
I'll just say this from a policy standpoint to go back to the chart. So states do 2 things very differently: accountability, accreditation. So those states that you may have mentioned, and I haven't looked at the ones.
Minnesota,
They probably are listed in accountability plan. We put both accountability and accreditation together. Some states separate that out. So they may go, Representative Norton mentioned Cognia or some third party, but it accreditates a process, and there's a statewide accountability. But almost every state in the country has some kind of state accountability to the measures to just measure against. Representative Hill. And but if you listen, we're trying to give school districts all the autonomy and how to get there with assistance.
I'm going to throw in a follow-up to what you just said, because you touched on something that's very important to me, that accountability and the use, you guys talk about targeted data, and I'm looking for how is that targeted data going to be used? And I know the state board hasn't had their vote and hasn't set that, but I want you to know how important this is to me as a legislator and for many others that I speak with. What is the criteria that we set with the targeted data of what leads to accredited, fully accredited, conditionally accredited, and not accredited? How long do we allow an individual school not to meet that criteria? And what's an acceptable amount of growth towards the criteria? Because again, I believe we won't solve some of these problems overnight, and I'm delighted to see growth when we see it. But what's an acceptable growth and not enough growth in those things? So those are things that I'm hoping to hear from you guys as you guys have your discussions, and I think it's appropriate for us to let you know what's important to us as you're having those discussions, because I think we all got to row in the same direction at some point. And another thing that's important, because you've heard me mention buildings, and that's statute 725170, where we do talk about it. And you guys have heard me say a lot of times, I want us to accredit every single building, and you guys are like, hey, reality check. So I just want to offer a compromise that we look at. We have a system by which we accredit our districts, but we also have a system by which we elevate schools who are not hitting the criteria that you guys set, and we look at accrediting them individually. That's just some feedback from me. I'll give you a chance to respond, and then we'll go to Representative Featherston and Representative Getz. Oops, who had to leave. Randy, did you want to respond to that? Or Melanie?
I'm sorry, I was looking at the time. I'm supposed to be across the street, the judicial building soon to kick off or close the civic engagement games that we have with students across the street. All of that is coming. I would, Melanie's heard me say this many times. I asked to say our hair's got to be on fire about improving student outcomes. I'd encourage you to hear my commissioner's remarks that I gave on Tuesday at the State Board about time and just making sure we're maximizing time and effort and process and that. It's coming. You have to think at the end and look at other states. If you get to a place where a school district is not doing well consistently over time, what happens? Because I've watched other states in takeover. Kansas City, Missouri is not too far from here. It rarely gets better. And so we have to think about how do we get everyone better. If we get to that, we've all failed. Everyone's failed. So we have to try to do everything we can to move that needle, because a state takeover hasn't proved in any state to be successful in the long term.
Thank you, Melanie. And by the way, you guys, I hope you know that Melanie substituted in at the last minute because Kathy Hopkins, the board president, had something else come up. Melanie, did you want to respond to that as well?
Absolutely. I was actually going to mention Chair Hopkins, because she has had the opportunity to sit in one of those school improvement days and be part of that conversation. I have not yet had the opportunity to do that, and I think I've said before that that's incredibly meaningful. I do not have a PhD in education, so I don't want to wade too far into the realm of, Dr. Ben Proctor would have been here today as well if he was in town, and that's really his space, and so I look to the experts to bring those recommendations to the board.
More than fair. Representative Featherston, would you like to close this out?
Thank you, Madam Chair. As we talk about improving scores and metrics, I'm assuming that the blueprint for literacy and enacting the science of reading is a big part of that. So when we enacted that program last year, the legislature allotted $10 million of funding, which I think many of us thought was going to continue in perpetuum, and that has been stripped to, at least as of yesterday, to 2.2 million. Can you comment on how that's going to affect your school's ability to get everybody trained, to bring up our scores? And then, as always, if you would like to comment on how the lack of SPED funding is affecting the progress of all students, I'm happy to hear that.
Madam Chair, could I possibly phone a friend? Because I know that Frank Hardwood at least was in the room. There he is.
Well, in term, but I'll also call on Idalia, because Idalia and I serve together on the Blueprint task force. So I'll let her respond first, and then if Frank we're casual today, we'll let Dr. Harwood sub in.
Thank you so much, Representative Estes. Yeah, I'm proud to serve on the advisory committee for the Blueprint. It's something that I'm very grateful that there's an opportunity for collaborative conversations with higher ed institutions and our public schools. I think that's very important to be able to move the needle. We have to be in this together, and KNEA is supporting that work because we want educators to be able to meet the needs of all students, and funding is a big part of that. In order to be able to compensate educators, not only to continue their learning, but also, as I mentioned earlier, for their time, that extra time that it takes. It's a very rigorous process. Some educators already have that skill set. They can prove that by taking an exam and to earn that seal of literacy. However, there are many educators that maybe haven't had that in quite some time, and they would need to have that opportunity to be able to continue their learning to meet the needs of all students, and that's going to be an ongoing process. It's going to take time and money, so we appreciate the continued support in that effort.
Stu, I saw your hand on, did you, okay. Dr. Harwood?
So one thing I would say is that the Blueprint for Literacy is a Board of Regents program, not a Department of Education program. That being said, the most important part about it is to make sure that our universities are doing the things they need to do, that our pre-service teachers are coming out of college with the understanding of structured literacy. The second part that was more for in-service teachers, current teachers, was to develop coursework to help teachers that are already in the field have another avenue other than letters or a couple other things that the state board has put together. So, I mean, the Blueprint for Literacy for the in-service teachers was another option that would be available to teachers to meet the seal of literacy. I think the most important part of the Blueprint is making sure that the pre-service teachers are receiving the training in the right areas for structured literacy.
Shannon?
I wanted to respond to Representative Featherston's question about special ed funding, and I will reiterate, I am speaking as an individual board member from my school district in this capacity. I can tell the committee that last year my school district used $14 million of base state aid and local property taxes to pay for special education services. We have a moral and ethical and legal obligation to serve those students fully, and so we do that gladly. But that $14 million would go an awful long way toward all of the needs that are identified in the processes that we go through. So this extensive needs assessment process that we go through that is now tied to and aligned with the KISA goals, you know, I read through the 90-some pages of input from each of our buildings and teams, and every one of them said things like, we need more staff for this. We need to have some smaller class sizes in some targeted areas, so we need some additional teachers. We need interventionists to do this or that. So while I recognize that, you know, we have to be very mindful of needs across the state and also the budget, funding special ed at a higher level than no new money, which is kind of one of the conversations that's going on right now. You know, the new money that was put in last year was significant for school districts to make progress in really targeting some of those goals. And so I think that my district is trying very hard to move the needle on academic achievement, but there are just some there are just some constraints in the system that it is sometimes really hard to overcome.
Right, and to close this out, Stu?
Just to respond to Representative Featherstone's argument or discussion point, we saw the value, at least I do, and when Commissioner Watson talks about the urgency of the science of reading, the great thing about what the blueprint is that our pre-service teachers coming in that we would hire would have that certification and be able to accomplish that while our teachers are working on the science of reading. And having a family member go through that, as well as seeing our teachers, it is a master's level course on top of their teaching. And so being able to really get that process so that 10-year window shrinks down to 2 years, because it truly does make a difference in how we teach reading and what we're seeing as far as outcomes for students.
Okay, I said we were going to close out, but don't go anywhere just yet. Before we do, I want to give a couple of thank yous. I want to thank Tim Grand for helping us to have Adalia here today, Jim Carlskent for helping us to have Stu here, our last-minute substitute, and Shannon also was a last-minute substitute because the board member she had planning to come couldn't come. So thank you all for your work to help us to be here today. I sincerely thank all of my committee members for a very robust and insightful discussion. And guest Michelle needs to get your names down exactly right, spelling, first, last, and proper titles. So before you leave, could you please, I think you have Shannon's because she's a frequent flyer, and Dr. Harwood, but Idalia, Melanie, and Stu, please don't leave the room without talking to Michelle. Thank you all. Anything for